Have you ever said a word so often, so much, that the word begins to lose its meaning? You say a word again and again and again. So, I tried it. I was just kind of working through this, and I was like, okay, I'll just Westgate Church, Westgate Church, Westgate Church, Westgate Church, Westgate Church. And you start saying it faster, Westgate Church, Westgate Church. It sounds like I'm saying Whiskey Church, right? With Pastor John Nee Walker. All right, so, but then you get this. Sometimes in life we say or we hear a word or a phrase or a quote or a verse again and again, over and over, and it begins to lose its meaning. It's lost, it's gone. And when that happens, and in your notes, I want you to follow with me. In your notes, what that's called is semantic satiation. Semantic satiation. See, that word means this: the psychological phenomenon where repetition causes a word or a phrase to temporarily lose its meaning for the listener, who then processes the speech as meaningless sound. Something you've said again and again, hearing something over and over. The mind actually gets tired of hearing it, and it starts to block the signal. And it's like your brain has this spam filter, like email, that just marks this as meaningless sound. It happens again and again. If you're a parent, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Any parents in the room? Yes. We're all like, yes, we're all in therapy together. For my parents, it was John, don't. John, don't. John, don't. I thought my middle name was Don't. I mean, that's how, John, don't. So it could be parents with threats again and again to discipline, or mottos, or mantras, or common heartfelt phrases. Something that you would say to somebody else. For example, the words, I love you. It can be real lost because you've said it so often. I want to give you an example of that. Watch this clip. Show you how that plays out.
Hello?
Hey, it's me. I know you wanted me to get paper towels. Did you want me to get the kinds with like the chickens and ducks on them, or?
I'll let you make that call, babe.
Okay, I won't let you down.
Okay, love you. Bye.
Okay, love you too. Hey, Karen, wait.
Yeah?
I've been thinking about this whole automatically saying I love you at the end of phone calls thing. I was wondering if we could drop it.
What?
Yeah, I mean, we know how we feel. We don't have to say it at the end of every call.
So you want to stop saying I love you?
Well, technically, we don't say I love you now. I mean, we've got it down to like, love you. It's almost gone already.
Oh, so we're talking about just dropping the I love you just at the end of phone calls.
For now.
You know what? It's not a bad idea, because when we actually do say it, it'll mean that much more.
Exactly. I mean, it'll really pop. It'll almost be shocking.
Okay.
All right.
Well, goodbye.
Goodbye.
Hello?
Hey, it's me.
Yeah.
Just wanted to say I love you.
And I love you too.
All right.
All right, love you.
Love you too.
You see what I'm talking about? It's so easy. It's semantic satiation. You just start and it just rolls right out. You have no idea. I had something like this just happen to me recently, just this fall. It reminded me of this clip, actually, where I was on the phone. What I do for the city, I work a lot with the city leaders and the mayors, city council, different, like negotiating things for us to be able to do church-wide projects. Beautiful day. And so the mayor calls me on my cell phone while I'm driving somewhere. And so I got him on speakerphone. He's talking to me about, we want to work on a project together. I'm real excited about partnering with the churches and doing some things. I'm like, man, this is awesome. And then, you just kind of wrapping up your phone call. And when you wrap up your phone call, you kind of get in a cadence. Okay, all right, you have your people call, and we'll set that up. And he's like, yeah, we'll call and we'll set that up. And then he goes, love you. What? So I take him off speaker, because I'm like, whoa, hold on. I love you too, Mayor. I didn't know what to say. I didn't want him to feel bad, like he said he loved me and I didn't love him, so. It's weird. We've never talked about it either. When we say we love our city loves us. At least me. So we are in this series called Anthem. And Anthem, what we're doing is we are carefully and methodically walking through what it means to be a disciple of Jesus. And ironically, there are phrases that Jesus uses. Love God, love your neighbor, love one another. These are phrases that we use here all the time, and I mean all the time. And could it be that semantic satiation has crept in a bit here at Westgate, where our culture and the mantras and the statements that we call of discipleship, 640, and the command to love your neighbor has been somewhat weakened, or it has subconsciously, we've blocked that out and those words as noise through a mental spam filter. Love your neighbor. Love your neighbor. We want you to love your neighbor. Love God, love your neighbor. Father John says, love your neighbor. We should love our neighbor. And then I blocked it out. I'm beginning to ask myself the question it's very similar for those of you that are in my age group. Remember the Charlie Brown TV specials when his parents would talk? What did they sound like? Yeah, remember? All the young people going, okay, I gotta go. These people are weird. But that's what the parents sound was, that semantic satiation. It was just noise. And has the words that is the very specific of who we are as a church, have we lost the edge on that? We've heard it so many times. In your notes, I wrote down something called the genius of Jesus. And Steve talks about the genius of Jesus all the time. The genius of Jesus is this. He wants to see the world transform, and he wants to see it transform through us. So he calls us to be his disciples. And that's what we as a church, we have one charter, very simple, to make disciples. That's our charter. We call it 640, based on Luke 6:40, where it says in the passage that if I'm blanking on the passage. When a disciple is fully trained, he'll be like his teacher. And we qualify that with three loves. Love God, love your neighbor, and love one another. This is to live and love like Jesus. That's the genius of Jesus. And we're going to call you to that again and again. And today, we want to be able to break away from any semantic satiation that anyone in this room may have about the concept of love your neighbor. So there's a story in the scriptures in Mark chapter 2 that has really, it's one of my favorite stories, but it has challenged me and it has really kind of called me out as I begin to look at my own neighbors and my neighborhood. So guys, if you have your Bible, turn to Mark chapter 2. We're going to look at this, the front end of that story, chapter 2, verse 1. Before we go any further, I want to pray. Just ask the Lord to open our eyes. Will you pray with me? God, we thank you for the chance to come together and to be challenged by your word, to be refined by your scriptures, and to be opened up to what it is you'd have us see and know today, that we would live intentionally different. We thank you that you continue to work through us. We illuminate our eyes as we look at your scriptures. We thank you that you love us, you and our mayor. Amen. Okay, Mark chapter 2, starting at verse 1. It says this: a few days later, when Jesus again entered Capernaum, the people heard that he had come home. They gathered in such large numbers that there was no room left, not even outside the door, and he preached the word to them. Some men came, bringing to him a paralyzed man, carried by 4 of them. Since they could not get him to Jesus because of the crowd, they made an opening in the roof above Jesus, digging through it, and lowered the mat the man was lying on. When Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralyzed man, "Son, your sins are forgiven." Now, the story goes on, and I don't want to read the rest of the story, but just to summarize, the religious leaders that are in the room watching this thing go down challenge that, like, who's this person that says he can forgive sins? And Jesus perceives that they are having these thoughts, and he really kind of challenges their thoughts, and he says, which is harder to say? Your sins are forgiven, or take up your mat and walk? They'd be like, that's a tough question. And Jesus says, to show you that the Son of Man has power on earth to forgive sins, I say to you, take up your mat and walk. And the guy gets up and he walks out. Now, the dude that had a really hard time getting in has a really easy time getting out. Everyone's like, whoa, that dude just walked. Crazy story. But the front end of this story, it's always mesmerized with it. I've been mesmerized with it because it's packed, to me, with such a significant backstory that we don't have. And when I read the scriptures, I try to project myself and begin to try to understand what is actually happening in this story, as if I can enter the story and understand even some of the backstory of it. Capernaum, that city, is significant in this. It's the hometown of Peter and Andrew and James and John and Matthew. It's like their hometown crew is right there, and everybody knows. Jesus has healed Peter's mother-in-law in that city. He's taught in the synagogue in Capernaum and cast out a demon. That caused enough of a stir. And the Roman centurion had asked Jesus to heal his servant in that same city. Capernaum became this common landing place. It was like Jesus' home turf. And so there's definitely a buzz about Jesus, because it says in the scriptures, it says when he entered it again, so he had been there before, stirred stuff up, made things happen. So when he came back, the crowd is coming. And there's a ton of people that are there, those that are interested, those that are curious, the skeptics, the followers, those that just want to see something cool go down. It's packed, wall to wall, jammed with people, much like the DMV last Monday. Don't ask. And it says this, it says, some men came bringing a paralyzed man. Now again, confession to you, as I read the scriptures, I project myself into it. I try to understand how it played out, how that conversation go, as if I was standing right there. And because, as many of you know, I have a bit of a twisted mind, I think things, I'm like, man, how did this go down? What was the conversations like? And I think of these four guys knowing that, hey, Jesus is coming back to town. They're talking, hey, Jesus is coming back to town. Hey, one of them has the idea. Why don't we go get Larry? I don't know what his name is. I just give him Larry, our paralyzed friend. And let's take him to Jesus. Imagine one of the other guys going, oh, you sure? I mean, maybe he's busy or he's not around. I'm like, he's paralyzed. How do you not? You could do this. And so they get together and they decide this is what we're going to do. It's a great idea. And they get around and they take him to Jesus. And it's crowded. If you've been to a place that's crowded, like a concert or something, or the DMV or anywhere where it's just like this massive wall-to-wall people, and it's just really packed. If your spouse is anything like mine, where if we've got there and we've got our spot, and someone's trying to weasel in, does that bug anybody? Because it bugs my wife a lot. She's like, look at those people weaseling in. It's our spot. My wife it's crowded, she usually hands me a purse, says, go find us a spot. I'm like walking in with a purse. I'm that guy. But one of them has this great idea. And again, I think of it. One of them, they can't get in. They've annoyed people. They can't get in. One of them says, let's go on the roof. And another had to have said, wait, what? Go on the roof? And they had to convince, yes, let's go on the roof. We can do this. So they go on the roof. There's something brilliant to this backstory, because these few verses show us something unique about these four friends. And it's my assumption, as I just read this passage, that it's very simply this: they're just really, really good neighbors. And so as I read this passage and I read it and we work through it together, there's things that I want you to see. There's four things that just jump out to me in this. It's in your notes. I want you to just write these things down. First is this. First is the group dynamic. Group dynamic. There's strength in the group. The group has this collective resolve that they've got to do things together. They've got to carry a stretcher. They've got to lower the mat down to Jesus. And it's fundamentally and absolutely requires everyone in the group to be on the same page, because once one guy says, I don't feel like doing this anymore, that changes the whole lowering the guy down to Jesus. We would have read that story completely different as the guy that fell on Jesus. I mean, that's what would have been the story. Angry mob chases 3 men. It requires them. And there's a reason for us as we do discipleship and we do community and we do 640 that we do this in group, because there's group dynamic. There's strength in the group. There's the collective that is far greater than what the individual will experience. There's the processing of the group together. There's the interesting pieces that you're going to collect along the way. No one of us is greater than all of us. Second thing I want you to see that just stood out to me was the major obstacle. The major obstacle. There's always a reason or excuse, real or self-made, that can serve as a roadblock to inaction. Always. You can create your own. You can create your own if you want one. The major obstacle was for them an overwhelming crowd. But when it comes to loving our neighbor, there's all kinds of obstacles that we can make that can easily become our excuse. I'm just really busy. He's just really busy. He's never home. He's from a different country. We don't speak the same language. He's really difficult, and we just don't get along. But there was no obstacle that was going to stop these guys. Nothing. Third thing I want you to see is what I call unyielding pursuit. Unyielding pursuit. There is a vision that each one of these men has that drives them to be relentless and resourceful in their pursuit, and it's this: if we can only get him to Jesus, that is the vision that caused them to be relentless. The vision is that they have either seen or heard or experienced the transforming work of Jesus, and they want the same for their neighbor. I'll do whatever it takes to get my neighbor to Jesus. Have you had that mindset before, where you see your neighbor, you're like, I will be relentless and do whatever it takes to get him to Jesus, expose him some way. I don't think like that all the time, but I'm convicted by this story because it's obviously there. Fourth thing I see is what I call deliberate faith. Deliberate faith. There is a plain and simple faith that looks like this. It looks like this. I'm going to do my part, expose my neighbor to Jesus, and have faith that Jesus will do his part. I'm just going to do my part, knowing that I have faith. Once I get him exposed to Jesus, Jesus will do what he's going to do. See, you know, the scriptures never call you to save your neighbor, ever. It calls you to love your neighbor. And you love your neighbor by loving and living like Jesus in front of them. And you expose them to Jesus, and it's his job to do what he does. I mean, it's a shift in our mindset. We always think, I gotta lead my neighbor to Christ and decide. No, you have to expose him to Jesus by loving him genuinely. It's super deliberate to step out, do something in order to make exposure happen. The faith part is trusting that Jesus will do what Jesus does. So last week, Steve talked about this. We began to introduce this subject. What does this mean for us to love our neighbors? And remember, do you guys remember this card? If you weren't here last week, you passed out this card. It should be in your bulletin this week. And one of these is you, and the 5 around you are your neighbors. And we're supposed to try to get to know our neighbors. What's a way to, really kind of challenging us to step it out, make it real personable. And I remember sitting with this and looking at it and think, I know my neighbors pretty well, except for one. My next door neighbor on the left of me. And so we worked out a little video deal that I want to show you right now. So we're teaching on how to get to know your neighbor, how to love your neighbor. And as Steve had passed out that card for us last week, for us to identify who our neighbors are. I came to the realization I know all my neighbors except for one, and it's actually my next door neighbor. I just haven't taken the time. He's been there for a year. I haven't taken the time to get to know him at all. I don't know his name. I don't know anything about him. And so I'm a little nervous, but I worked it out. My daughter went over there earlier in the week, and he agreed for us to come over and actually film it. He thought it would be fun. So we'll see how it goes. I just want to spend a little time, see how it goes, and it may go great, may tank, but we want to find out what his interests are, what his issues may be, and if all else fails, I got cookies. So they're right across the street. I'm right next door. Looks very clean.
We're just next door.
Yeah, I know, right? Hi, how are you? My wife made cookies for you guys. So.
Thank you.
Hope you like chocolate chip cookies.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah. You guys got married recently?
Yes, we did. We just signed on last Thursday. Yeah.
Well, congratulations. So those are wedding cookies then. Koresh and oh, look at your couch is. I must have hit a button. I'm just gonna make myself at home. Did I hit a button? Did it just happen?
It's on this side.
Where is it?
And I hit in the way.
Oh, look at that. Oh, it's electric.
Oh yeah, our visitors all love it.
I just hit it. All of a sudden I hit something and my legs are like, well, I'll make myself out. Do you feel awkward a little bit? That was a little awkward. Oh, David and Me is her name. And he's Canadian. Canadian, yeah, Canadian, and he's Vietnamese. This is very weird. He's from Canada and Canadian citizenship, and she's from Germany, Vietnamese. I told him, I said, you don't look any bit Canadian at all. We had a wonderful conversation. It was super weird because it was electric, like Lazy Boy, and for some reason I turned and I bumped it, and all of a sudden, and I'm like, hey, I'll just be right here. And I am very proud of myself. He works at Google. I'm proud of myself for not saying anything stupid. I asked her, what do you do? She says, I'm an OBGYN. I'm like, and I didn't say anything stupid. I was so happy. I went home. I said, what did she do? I said, don't ask. It's all good. It would have been so much easier if I would have done something sooner. It would have had such a deeper impact. If I had a certain mindset, and it's a mindset that I want to begin to live like and call you to, and it's that of what I call a first responder. My brother's a firefighter and a captain, and he talks about this concept of first responder, and it's a mindset that prepares yourself to respond. Here's the definition of first responder. It says someone who is prepared to immediately and appropriately respond to any given situation. Fighting through all the obstacles, relentless pursuing, knowing in faith that if I could just expose them to Jesus, something will happen. A first responder is prepared. And that's the mindset that we have to shift our thinking towards. Too often we become what we call passive bystanders. Passive bystanders has developed a concept in one of my favorite authors, Malcolm Gladwell, in his book, The Tipping Point. He talks about the bystander effect, and he qualifies it as this. The bystander effect is one in which, as more people are present at a scene of distress, the responsibility for action becomes proportionately diffused. The passive bystander assumes that someone else would do it. The passive bystander thinks, this isn't my problem. The passive bystander just does nothing. And this is so counter to the teachings of Jesus and so counter to our call to you as a church to make disciples and have you live and love like Jesus. It is not passive, and it does not stand by. It is actively engaged as a first responder. Let me qualify how first responder, there's a difference between first responder and passive bystander. You have it right there in your notes there. First responder and passive bystanders. First responder does this. They take the opportunity to build bridges. building bridges. Every interaction just strengthens a bridge between you and your neighbor. Passive bystander allows bridges to deteriorate. A first responder restructures their agendas and their preferences and their schedules in light of the needs of their neighbor. Do you have a favorite parking spot on your street? And does it bug you when somebody just doesn't pull forward enough? Anybody have that issue? We have it every day. And if you restructure that to say, it's okay, I don't own the street. Because a passive bystander demands their own rights. A first responder discovers and engages in interests. Finds out what his neighbor's about. One of my neighbors is into Harleys. We know when he comes and goes. And I'll go over there and talk to him. We'll talk Harley talk. He actually did his wedding. We had a Harley wedding here at the church. There were 60 Harley Davidsons out in the courtyard. It was awesome. I walked in as a pastor to bad to the bone. Because that's his interest. That's what he's into. You discover and then you engage. Passive bystanders are consumed with their own interests. First responders look for ways to respond to the issues. Issues are different than interests. Issues are things that arise that be like, man, we got to try to figure this out and solve the problem. They look for ways to respond to those, where a passive bystander looks for ways to avoid, looks away to avoid issues. They look away. That's the difference between the two. And Jesus calls us to this first responder mindset. And I have been so convicted as I've just been prepping for this and looking at my neighborhood and thinking, how many times have I been a passive bystander? I have one neighbor, I've shared this maybe once before about a neighbor that was across the street when we first moved in. His name was Ed. And Ed did not like me. And I'm trying to get to know all my neighbors. I'm connecting with these guys, and Ed, for some reason, did not like me or my family. And he, in fact, said it, I do not like you. I'm like, what did I do? He says, you run in a drug house. I said, no, I'm a pastor. He said, I don't see you do pastoring. I didn't know that was a word. Pastoring. I said, yeah, that's what I do all day. I mean, we argued. It was horrible. And he would cuss out my son. My son, the one who plays drums, he's such a good kid. Why would you cuss him out? And we just did not get along. And I tried, and I worked hard at it. So there's one day, I'm driving home, and I see Ed out in front of his house, and he's mowing his lawn. I got just a regular-sized house, regular lawn, and he has the same, but he uses a tractor mower. It's about 3 swipes, and he's done. He's out there, and I have a prompting in my spirit, and I don't get that a lot, where I feel like God is leading me to say and do something, but when I get it, I'm like, man, I really felt it. Like the Lord said, it was very clear. Go talk to Ed. I'm like, wow. So what I do, I pull in, I go inside, my daughter is sitting there, and I told her, we had this conversation, I said, I feel like I'm supposed to go, like God is telling me to go talk to Ed. You know what she said? Then you probably ought to go talk to Ed. I said, yeah, I should. I grabbed something to eat real quick. Looked outside the window, and he is already gone. He's back in his house. And I thought, well, he's probably eating. Maybe I'll catch him later. And I ignored it because it was difficult. And I set it aside. 3 days later, Ed dies. I missed it. It's a regret I still live with. Because I felt like God said, do this. And I was like, I was clear. It was clear that he said it, and it was clear that I knew that he said it because I even confirmed it with my daughter, and I didn't do anything. And I remember arguing and being anguished over this, feeling like I dropped the ball and arguing with God, like, God, Ed was so difficult, and it was as if God was saying, that's why I put you right here. But you know how weird God is that he gives you these second chances, these other opportunities, these other windows. He's just continuing to call you out to do different things, and he gives me this second chance. And so I'm like, I'm going to go over that. It was the day of the memorial, the funeral. I could tell because people are kind of coming and going. And I go over to the house, and I talk to it's my first time in the house. I talk to his wife, Mary. And I said, Mary, I'm the neighbor across the street, the one he doesn't like. She goes, yeah, we know who you are. I said, I'd like to come to the memorial if I could. Just, express my deepest regrets to you. And she said, yeah, that's very sweet of you. I'd love for you to come. And so it was happening pretty quickly. So I went home and I told my daughter, I'm going to the funeral. And I got my suit on and I raced on over to Oak Hills over here off Kirtner near Monterey Highway over there. And I race over there. I get in. It's already started. It's already underway. I walk in and I sign the guest book and I sit down in the back and I got a program and I'm just going to pray for this family. And I'm praying, just praying for this redemption. God, just do something. Praying for the family and looking around, I don't really recognize anybody. And there's the time in the memorial where it's an open casket and people come forward and I'm one of the last rows, and so I'm coming forward and I walk up to the casket and I look and it's not Ed. I'm in the wrong funeral. This is a true story. So I look at the funeral director and I said, this isn't Ed. He goes, no, this is Eugene. I said, well, I thought maybe Ed was a nickname. No, and he says, no, that's not Ed. I'm like, where's Ed? And he said this, that's not Ed. I said, I know that. We're having this in front of everybody. It's like, people are like, what's going on? I mean, I've signed the guest book and everything. It's at the memorial down the way. And I'm like, oh man, and I run out. People are like, who was this strange man? So I missed it. I'm like, man, I'm trying to find a Christian way to say, man, I suck. I mean, that's all I could think of. So I go back to my house, and they're having this kind of gathering, at the, a meal at the house afterwards, and I walk in. And I see Mary, and she's like, I thought you were going to go to the funeral. I said, well, I was at Eugene's. I told her the whole story, and they are laughing hysterically. They were like, oh my gosh. And she said this. She goes, oh, if Ed knew, he would roll over in his grave. And I said, so would Eugene. So funny. Why does this stuff happen to me? And we sat together with the family. I sat with the family. We laughed and we loved like good neighbors should. And God gave me a window, an opportunity of redemption to re-engage with my neighbors. Do you have a tough neighbor that you've ignored? Have you been a passive bystander in your neighborhood? Trust me. God is giving you a second chance at redemption to be able to love like he loved with a tough neighbor. Here's what I want you to do. Steve gave us this card. I'm going to make it even more simple. We'll still use the card, but I want you to take your hand. Use your hand. 5 neighbors, because we're talking about you're in the center and then there's 5 neighbors around you. I know all of them by name now. So the neighbor on my left, neighbor on my right, and the 3 across the street. Whatever works for you, if that's not the construct of your neighborhood. Whatever works for you, just name them out. Look at your hand right now. Look at your hand and name them out. I want you to actually figure out, see the faces, the houses if you don't know their names, but look at them right now. If you've got a really difficult neighbor, make him the middle one. You probably have waved to him that way before. Now look at them. Remember this, and here's where I want you to go with this. Do you remember what God has done in your own life? Where he has brought you through when someone exposed you to Jesus and the transformation that has happened in your life, it can happen in their life as well. And you are in that neighborhood for a specific reason. There's no excuse. There needs to be a relentless pursuit. Not to save them, just to love them. If you have your neighbors, hold them up. I want to see them. Hold them up for me right here. If you have them, if you've done this, hold them up for me. These are our 5. Here's what I'm going to ask you to do this week. As you pull into your house, every time you pull into your neighborhood, every time you pull into your driveway for 30 seconds, don't get into the particulars. Just say, God, help me to love, name. God, help me to love. God, help me to love. For 5 days, that's all I ask. And let God do what God's going to do. Because he put you there for a reason. You pull into your neighborhood, and you pray it out. You lift up your neighbors, and I'm going to pray with me. God, we thank you for challenging us, for calling us out to live radically and intentionally different, to love our neighbors because you have strategically placed us in the home that we are in, to be Christ to these people, to live and love like Jesus. Will you use us in a unique way, even this week, as we reach out to our neighbors, to encourage them, to care for them, to come alongside them, to laugh and to love. We pray for them in Christ's name. Amen.